So we're still in this CloudFront stuff, which I want to try and wrap up today. Now, really, at this stage, it's this is the third lecture, um, and what we're trying to do is deploy a full stack web app on AWS. And in this image here, we know now that what we can do is, well, we know about API Gateway. That gives us the back end. We're kind of ignoring this part over here now because we haven't covered it. So we can deploy the backend using a combination of API Gateway, Lambda, and DynamoDB in our case. We can deploy the front end, for example, a React app. We can deploy that in an S3 bucket. Uh, One slight issue though is how do we get the React code? Because the React code wants to communicate with this Web API gateway. And how does it find out the URL for this gateway? Um, we could hard code it, of course, but that's not desirable. What we'd like is, I guess the best way is at deployment time, when we deploy this entire piece of infrastructure. At deployment time, we want to be able to make the API gateway's URL somehow accessible to our React code. And we started to see how we solve that problem, or a way of solving it the last, and I'll finish that off today. As well, rather than having just the S3 service handling all requests to the React app, we decided to introduce the CloudFront service. And so what the CloudFront service does for us is it gives us this kind of setup where we have these edge location servers distributed around the globe. And these edge location servers, they cache the web app's content so that users now, when they want to load up the React app into their browser, they only need to really communicate with the edge location server because it will have hopefully cached the web app because some other user in the same geographical area has also loaded it sometime earlier. Okay, and we know how to set up this whole infrastructure. We know how to create an S3 bucket. We know how to create what's called a distribution. We know how to link the distribution to our S3 bucket. We refer to the S3 bucket as the origin for our distribution. And also in passing, we just mentioned really this notion of an origin access control entity, I suppose, really, which allows us to secure the S3 bucket from public access. So what this does is it makes the contents of the S3 bucket only available to the distribution, to the edge location servers. So the last part then is to go back to this idea of how does the React app discover the URL of the backend, the web API. So that brings us over to here. And you remember we have all this code from the last day. This is our CDK CDK app, I suppose, yeah. And we define two constructs for ourselves here on the left. One construct, custom construct, that takes care of creating the web API. This construct here called frontend, that takes care of creating the S3 bucket, the CloudFront distribution, linking them up together. We can also pass information between constructs, and in particular, we passed the web API's URL into the front-end construct. And so if we go into that now, which we looked at the last day, So let's see. Uh, yeah, so this is the structure of the props object that we pass to our that we're passing to our custom construct, and the first part of it contains. Oh, let's see. Sorry, let me do something else. Sorry, now I want to change branches. I think this is the branch I want to be in. Let me just check that. Yeah. Okay. Back to our front end. We're passing into our front end the Web API's URL. Okay. And where we're using that is we are creating just a standard JSON structure here with a key value pair, and the value contains the URL of my Web API. And I'm uploading this structure, I'm uploading it to the bucket. Okay, as in here. I'm also uploading the actual React app itself. Yeah. And we saw the last day, it's kind of roughly where we left off, when we actually went into the S3 bucket. I'll go into S3. And I find my bucket. Here we can see this is the actual entry in the bucket that contains that structure that we talked about. And we looked at it the last day. Yeah. So here's the actual URL of my web API. And I could double check that by going into the API gateway service, finding my web API, and I would find out that this is the actual URL that was generated from my web API. So the last piece of the jigsaw is, how does our React app access essentially this file called config.json? And the file is inside in the same bucket that the React app code is in. And so the answer to that question is, if I look at the React code, so I've got to use effect hook here in my React code, and it's calling it's calling a function called get backend. Get backend is defined up here. Here's the get backend function. But in this file, at the very top of the file, I've got a fetch call, and I'm fetching the file at /config.json. Now we know / means in the same folder that this code is contained in, and this code is contained in the top folder of my bucket. So the /config.json, there should be a file called config.json in the top folder of my S3 bucket. and I've just showed you that there a moment ago. So I can actually fetch the config.json file, and all I'm doing here is I'm just setting up a little local structure for myself. It's probably overcomplicated, but in general, there might be a number of web APIs in my backend. I just only have one. If there were many APIs, then my config.json would have a number of entries in it for each web API that my React app communicates with. But it's not the case. In this case, there's only one, and this is it here. Okay. So I just need to index into this structure to get the URL of my web API. And that's what I'm doing down here. I'm making a fetch call. This is the reference to the data structure that I have above there at the top of the file. And I'm just indexing into the structure, right? And I'm accessing the endpoint. So dot endpoint there will refer to this dot endpoint here. So that gives me the URL. And I'm just accessing, essentially, I'm accessing the demo endpoint in my REST API. Now, I didn't show you the REST API, but if I just flick over to go back to my CDK, jumping around the place now, but I go back to here and go into this construct, which is where I create my web API. So here I'm creating my root, if you like, and then I'm adding an endpoint of demo. So that's the demo endpoint that I'm accessing from my React app. Okay, and we've seen this kind of code before. So whatever is returned by that endpoint, then I'm essentially kind of returning it back to my use effect hook. Yeah, and I'm using it to set a state variable within my app. So here's the state variable. So the state variable is called just message, and I am rendering whatever the message is. Where am I rendering it? I'm rendering it here. And if I actually load my React app, if I go back to here and I grab, because I've CDK deployed this already. So this is the distribution domain name. So if I copy that, open up a browser tab, so this bit here, right? Success in connecting to API. That string is what was returned by the demo endpoint in my web API. And to prove that to you, what I can do is back to my CDK. The actual Lambda is the wrong place. Go back to here. Only one Lambda in the back end of this, which is this Lambda here. And we can see that it returns the message, success in connecting to API. So my React app did successfully contact the web API, and it discovered the web API's URL dynamically by accessing that config.json in the S3 bucket, and the config.json in the S3 bucket was created at deployment time for me. And the final thing I could just show you is if I open up my developer tools, go into the networks tab, and if I just do a refresh, so when I did refresh there, uh, the request was sent from my browser uh, to the edge location server of my distribution, because this is the distribution's domain name or URL. The edge location server checked in its cache if it had the index.html, which it did. The index.html was loaded into the browser. In the index.html, I then requested this JavaScript file, which contains the JavaScript file of my React app. Also, this CSS file. Both of these either came from the edge location server's cache, or they went right back to the S3 bucket, depending. And then my React app requested the config.json from the S3 bucket. That also may have been cached in the edge location server. And finally, my React app made a call to the web API's demo endpoint. Bear in mind now, the communication between my React app running in the browser and the web API, that is not going through the edge location servers. My edge location servers only handle requests for the front end. Anything in the S3 bucket essentially. And you could kind of tell that because if I select, let's say, this one here, you can see here, look, that the request URL is the URL of my CloudFront distribution. It kind of matches what's up here. Whereas if I select the demo, the request URL in this case is the URL of the web API. Right. You would really need to go back over that yourselves when I make the code available to clarify what's going on there if you're unclear. Or if you've got a question, I'm happy to take it. No? Okay. Now, there's one piece left though. I just need to do some cleanup here first. I want to destroy the stack and deploy a new one. So this is the stack here. I want to delete that. And I let that work away. And I want to deploy another one and then talk a little bit about this second stack as it's deploying. So I need to switch branches at this stage. And just check to see if that other stack is deleted. Not yet. I need that to delete first before I can deploy the other one because they may clash with one another. I'll just talk a little bit while that's working, maybe. So the last piece of this jigsaw is my React app's domain name is a CloudFront distribution domain name. And, essentially it's not a very kind of user-friendly domain name. I would prefer to have a custom domain name, but how do I actually achieve that? In my case, I'm going to make the custom domain demo.dermotoconnor.com. And I want that, if anybody around the globe inputs that into their browser, then they will access my full stack React app. Okay, seems straightforward, but there's a couple of things that I need to do in order to achieve that. Again, I'm just going to check to see if this has fully deleted. Still working its way. It's slow now because of the CloudFront distribution part to it. I'm sort of guessing that's what's delaying it. Although I thought it would have deleted by now. No, still not there. Okay, so this is what I've just demonstrated to you. We've successfully deployed a full stack React app with a React front end and a Web API backend. And we managed to get the front end to discover the backend's URL kind of dynamically. The last part then is, as I was saying there a moment ago, is to actually have a custom domain name for our full stack. Really, I guess it's for the front end. Okay, so our objective is to associate a custom domain name with a CloudFront enabled web app. Yeah. So the first thing you've got to do is you've actually got to buy your own domain name. Now, I've bought the domain name dermotoconnor.com. There are lots of places, there are lots of online services where you can buy domain names from. This one that I'm mentioning here, this kind of oddly named one of Pork Bun, at least about 12 months ago, or maybe 18 months ago, that was the cheapest place to go to buy a domain name. And domain names only cost you, something in the range of between 5 and 10 euros per year. And you can relinquish them at any stage. So if you buy a domain name, cost you whatever, 8 euros, that 8 euros will allow you to use that domain name for a year, and then you have to renew it every year after that. So they're not actually expensive at all. And at any stage, you can essentially kind of relinquish the domain name, put it back into the pool of available domain names, and you're no longer charged. Okay. So I bought a domain name, as I said, and I just happened to buy it off AWS, but you can buy it off Pork Bun, or GoDaddy is another service that sells domain names. So that's step one. Step two then is, this is a manual step. You've essentially got to kind of register your domain name, or maybe register probably is not the right word. You need to record your domain name with AWS's Route 53 service. Route 53, despite its name now, is actually AWS's DNS service. Yeah. And I'll show you in a moment how to do that. But it is a manual thing that you've got to do. You cannot do this via the CDK. And which kind of makes sense, because you would only be recording your domain name with AWS's Route 53. You would do that once, and you might reuse that domain name for a number of applications that you have deployed onto the AWS platform. Let me just check again to see if that thing has fully deleted. Okay, looks good. I need to go back here now and deploy this other one. Turns out now that this CDK project that I'm deploying is a multi-stack. And when you've got a multi-stack app, you can deploy individual stacks or you can deploy all of the stacks in one go. And I added on the minus minus all option there on the CDK deploy, which meant I want to deploy all of the stacks. Now I'll step my way through all of the stacks, which in or the remaining part of this lecture. And again, this one is going to be quite slow to deploy because it is deploying a CloudFront distribution, which is really the slow part. So I'll say yes to that. So it's going through deploying the first stack, and then it will ask me to confirm the deployment of the second stack. I'll let that work its way through. Go back to my slides. Oh yeah, so step two, how do I do? So I bought my domain name. How do I complete step two? Well, you just simply go into the Route 53 service. And let me jump back to the slides. So I'm saying in Route 53, the Route 53 console, create a hosted zone. So this is just an AWS Route 53 term. Create a hosted zone for your domain name. Okay. So it's as simple as this, really, right? You go into Route 53, you select hosted zones on the left, and you select create hosted zone. You type in your domain name here. So in my case, it would have been dermotoconnor.com. You can put a description if you want to. It's optional. Select it as a public hosted zone and click create. Okay, simple as that. So I've done that already. And you can see when we look at the hosted zones in my account, then has it switched regions in me? Why am I not seeing my hosted zones? Here we go. So everybody has a local hosted zone by default. And here's the hosted zone linked to my domain name. Okay, so I've created that. If I go into it, there's probably nothing in there right now that I can talk about. No, that's okay. We've created. That's all that we need to know about for now. Go back and check to see how's my deployment going. Say yes to that. Let that work its way through. Back to my slides. So I've done step two. Uh, oh yeah. Excuse me. So when you create a hosted zone, you're essentially telling Route 53 about your domain name. And you're linking your domain name to the Route 53 service. Now, what Route 53 does is it tells a number of what it's called its name service. It tells it about the fact that it knows about the domain name DermotO'Connor.com. Okay, so that means now that there are a number of AWS Route 53 DNS servers scattered around the globe. Now, there's probably about 4 or 5 that have an entry relating to DermotO'Connor.com. And we know how the DNS service works generally anyway. It means if anybody around the globe has DermotO'Connor.com as part of a URL in a browser, that domain name will be resolved once the request from the browser hits one of the Route 53 name servers. What am I talking about there? I go back to here. I go into so I'm inside of my DermotO'Connor.com hosted zone, and where are my name servers? See over here on the right? So there are 4 DNS servers owned by AWS that now effectively can resolve DermotO'Connor.com. Okay, and these servers are kind of randomly selected by AWS when I create my hosted zone. So your ones would be slightly different. You can also get those. I think you can get those back here. Actually, you don't have to go down into. No, maybe you do. Okay, maybe you do. Oh yeah, if I just expand this here, here are the servers, right? So you can actually kind of cut and paste those. Now, what do you do with those name servers? Uh, you need to complete step 3, which is also a manual step. And in step 3, you need to tell the registry where you bought your domain name. So let's suppose you bought it at porkbun.com. You need to tell porkbun.com about the Route 53 name servers that can resolve your domain name. Okay, that's what I'm saying here. On your domain's registry, e.g. porkbun.com, you need to copy the list of name servers to your domain name. So you need to copy the name servers to your domain name. Oh yeah, to your domain name, as in you've created your domain name in porkbun.com. So there's kind of an entry for, in my case, DermotO'Connor.com. There's an entry for DermotO'Connor.com in the porkbun registry website. And in that entry, you need to add the list of name servers, the list of AWS name servers. And now that means that porkbun.com will use those name servers to help resolve any browser that requests DermotO'Connor.com. So that's 1, 2, and 3, which is all kind of manual. And from there on, then we come back to our CDK world, if you like. So step 4 is, so I'm going to use DermotO'Connor.com for my React app. And well, that's just a domain name. And I'm going to use the subdomain demo. So the full domain name of my React app will be demo.dermotoconnor.com. And I'm going to be using that over HTTPS for security reasons. But I now need to create a certificate, TLS certificate, that will be used in doing any kind of encryption, decryption related to demo.dermotoconnor.com. Now, the certificate, I can use a particular AWS service called the Certificate Manager service to do that for me. So I can write some CDK code to ask the AWS Certificate Management Service to create a TLS certificate for my subdomain. Now, it turns out that that particular AWS service, the certificate manager, do I mention it here? The AWS certificate manager service, that's actually only available in the US East 1 region. Uh, so the stack that will take care of all of this, that stack actually needs to be deployed to the US East 1 region. And that's why I've actually had to create a multi-stack for this setup, because I mean, I could have deployed the entire React app code and web API in this US East 1 region, but I'd rather to deploy my actual application into EU West 1, which I've been doing up to now. But I'm going to have a separate stack that's going to be deployed to US East 1, and that other stack, all it's going to do is ask the AWS Certificate Manager to generate a certificate for my subdomain. And I will then retrieve that certificate reference from that stack and use it in my EU West 1 stack. Okay, so the last part then is to, let's just maybe start looking at some code now, maybe. Okay, everything has deployed. Now, again, I've got a web API. That's the URL of the web API. That's in the, can you tell from the, yeah, you can see there on the, as part of the domain name, it's actually deployed to EUS1. This is the domain name of the CloudFront distribution. So we've seen all of that before. So I can grab this now, and hopefully, I didn't check it though, but hopefully, let's see, cross fingers. I think I select, oh yeah, great, it works. Okay, so it's not talking to the back end though. That's okay, I'm not going to worry about that now. We know how to get it talk to the back end, so we'll just kind of ignore that. It is loading up the front end correctly for me though. But that is what we had up to now. But I want my custom domain name to work, so let's try that. So let's get rid of this ugly domain name and go demo dot demo.dia or MUID Connor.com. Let's try that again. Oh, did that enter correctly for me? Let's try that again. And it resolves. Okay, so that seems to be working. But how did I get that to work though? Still not talking to the back end, but I know what the problem is there, so we needn't worry about that. Let's look at the code. So the first thing I said is this is a multi-stack app, and if you see in my lib folder has similar structure to before. I have a constructs subfolder, and in there I have my two custom constructs. That's the same as before, the same structure as before. And in fact, there's no difference in the API, Web API custom construct. There are some new entries in the front-end construct, which we look at in a second. But other than that, the architecture is the same. I have a stacks subfolder as well, and that has two entries in it, which I was kind of alluding to there because I have two stacks now. And I'm running out of time yet again. If I look at this stack here, this is the stack that actually will be deployed to the US, which was it, US East one or US West one, whichever one it is anyway. And this is the stack that is going to generate the TLS certificate for my custom domain name. Now, I've also got an environment file at play here as well. If we go down to, where did I put it? Here. Now, it's not a standard .n file. It's actually just a TypeScript file. But I've got some, they are environment variables really, but I've defined them as JavaScript, as TypeScript variables. And if we just quickly go down through them, one variable contains the region that I want my main functionality to be deployed to, which in my case is EUS1. This one obviously contains my account, my AWS account number. This one, hosted zone. When you create a hosted zone, AWS will generate an ID for that hosted zone. And if I switch back to, there's a lot going on here now, but if I go back to hosted zones and select this one and expand this, here you can see the zone ID. So we need to actually make that zone ID available to my CDK code. And that's what I'm doing. I'm setting that up here anyway, and I'll be importing these into my stack files. So that's fine. I have a variable that contains my domain name, and I have a variable that contains the subdomain that I want to have linked to my particular React, my full stack app. So the full domain name of my React app will be subdomain.domain. That's okay. That's all of those. Let's go back to one of my stack files. You can see here I'm importing hosted zone and domain and subdomain, importing those from that environment file that I just showed you. And in my actual stack file, the first thing I do is I'm just getting a reference to the hosted zone entry itself from my Route 53. Route 53, as you may know, is a global service. It's not region specific. So I'm grabbing a reference to my hosted zone using this convenience function here. And I'm actually telling it, look, I'm giving it the domain name of my hosted zone, and I'm also giving it the hosted zone's ID. So I now in my CDK stack file, in this stack file, I have a reference to my hosted zone. And here I'm using the certificate manager service to create a certificate for me. And all it needs to know is, well, what's the domain name, the full domain name that this certificate is for, which in my case is subdomain.domain, in other words, demo.dermotoconnor.com. I'm telling it this is kind of boilerplate really, but how that certificate can be validated. So that's actually just going to create the certificate for me, and I now have a reference to that certificate, and I need to pass that certificate over to the other stack. The other stack is the one that creates all of the functionality, creates the buckets, the CloudFront distributions, the web API, etc., etc. Which brings us to the second stack, this one. Sorry, this one here. We've seen a lot of this before. In fact, we've seen most of it before, right? So again, what am I doing? I am creating an instance of my web API using my custom construct. I'm creating an instance of my front end custom construct. And you can see I'm passing in a number of things. In this case, I'm passing in the API's URL, I'm passing in the certificate, and I'm passing in the hosted zone. These two here, I got those from my other stack. This stack file, this stack of mine, its props object is of type this. Okay, I was talking about the props object T the last day. The props object is an extension of the default props object, and you can see I'm defining the structure of the props object up here. I'm saying it's the default props object and some additional properties that are unique to this particular stack. In particular, the certificate and the zone needs to be passed into this stack. If I go into up to here, where I actually instantiate all of this, this is the first time now where we have two stacks that need to be instantiated. Here I'm instantiating the stack that generates the certificate. Here I'm instantiating the stack that contains, all of the functionality. Now, what's different? Normally, when you have a multi-stack app, all of the stacks are deployed to the same region, but that doesn't apply in this case because, as I told you, this stack here needs to be deployed to the US East 1 region, whereas the second stack needs to be deployed to the EU West 1 region. And when you've got a cross-region CDK application, there's this additional property that you need to set. You're essentially kind of telling the CDK framework, look, this CDK app is multi-region as well as being multi-stack. So that's the purpose of this cross-region property being set to true here and also being set to true here. And here I am, I'm passing in the cert and the zone into the full stack. Now, there's one piece of the jigsaw that fortunately I'm not going to get to cover, which is unfortunate really. Or maybe I might just continue on, even though you may have to bail out now before, because you may have some other lecture to go to, but I'm actually just going to continue on, and you can watch the recording of this afterwards, if that's the case. If you can hang on, that's great. So I'm going to go into my front-end custom construct. And in here is all of the stuff that we've seen before, which is sorry, I just want to collapse that. let's see now, sorry. We're creating our S3 bucket. Here I'm just creating a local variable that contains the full domain name of my React app, which is a combination of the subdomain and the kind of main domain, if you like. That's okay. So this is my S3 bucket. We've seen all of that before. This is my distribution. We've seen all of that before. What's new though, or what's additional is I'm setting this certificate property, and I'm setting it to the certificate that was generated by the other stat, the US East 1 stat. I'm also setting this property here called domain names, because it can be plural. If I wanted to have my React app accessible under more than one subdomain of dermotoconnor.com, then I could do that. Doesn't apply in my case. There's only one subdomain, but you can see here this is an array, so I could have more than one. And I think the rest is the same. We've seen all of this before. Let me just check. Yeah, so there's nothing new other than the certificate and the domain names property. Okay. Now, this is a new entry though. We need to add to our Route 53. So in Route 53, I created a hosted zone for dermotoconnor.com. Now, in that hosted zone, I also need to add an entry for my subdomain, that is demo.dermotoconnor.com. And that entry essentially will link that full domain name, demo.dermotoconnor.com. It will link it or connect it to my CloudFront distribution. Because when somebody enters demo.dermotoconnor.com, that's going to be resolved eventually, and it will hit the Route 53 service in AWS. But we need to tell the Route 53 service where should it redirect the request to. In our case, we want to redirect it to our CloudFront distribution. And that's what the purpose of this entry here is doing, right? Because you can see as part of the configuration of this, what's called an A record. I don't really want to go into the detail of Route 53, but essentially what I'm telling it is that in this zone, let's see target here. Target is going to be, what's target going to do? It's going to link this entry to my distribution. And it's going to link it to, do I tell it the domain name? Oh yeah, see here, I'm kind of relating the full domain name to my distribution. So the net effect of that entry is to create that link. And the rest is as before, right? We've seen this before. We've seen all of this before. Okay. And the last thing I need to do maybe is just, if I go into Route 53, go into my hosted zone. Let's go back to here again. Never seems to oh yeah, okay. See down here now where I have a new entry in this list of entries, and the entries for demo.dermotoconnor.com. Well, that entry is there as a result of the piece of CDK code that I was just talking about there a moment ago. I don't know if we can tell from over here, but let's see. You see this here, right? That's the actual domain, the CloudFront domain name that was generated for my distribution. So I'm linking demo.dermotoconnor.com to this domain name. And that's how the routing actually works. When anybody enters my custom domain name into the browser, it will eventually be resolved to this CloudFront distribution domain name, and we know how it works from there on in. The edge location servers, the cache, the origin, etc., all of that stuff kind of takes care of the rest. Okay, so there's a lot going on there, admittedly, and I don't know if there's anybody still listening or not, but if there are, I'm happy to take a question or two. Now, what I will do is I will make this code available to you on GitHub, and you need to essentially just hack it to get it to work for a year case in relation to the assignment. Now, this is linked to the assignment because you remember in the assignment, if I bring up the assignment spec, the grading spectrum, I talk about uh, where do I mention it? So I'm saying full stack here. When I talk about full stack web app there, I'm talking about getting CloudFront and S3 all working. Here I talk about domain name, and that's really what I've been just talking about now, getting your own custom domain name to work uh, for your assignment. Now, what you will need to do, okay, the assignment is mainly about developing a web API backend, but you will also need to just hack up a React app. It doesn't need to be anything fancy. A basic React app, which allows you to trigger the backends of your web API. You know how to write, you've done lots of React code, so it doesn't have to be a multi-page React app, just one simple page with some buttons and text boxes, or however you want to uh, set it up for yourselves. Uh, you won't be really getting marks for the React side of it. You'll be getting marks for hooking up your React app to your backend and proving that it all works. I'm sure not. You may have questions about this, and that's fine. You can put those to me either in the labs, in the lecture next Thursday, whichever way you want to. Okay, I'll pause just in case there are any questions right now. No, okay. I'm going to leave it at that, and I'll talk to you on Thursday.